presenting, then we need to have your video and your audio on. Otherwise, I'm going to ask people to mute and mute their cameras so we can then get rid of the floating heads and get rid of the Brady Bunch effect, and we'll get down to a manageable number of folks. It'll also help our streaming bandwidth. So thank you. I assume there's no one who's participating here that's involved with any other team. We're not going to have any recesses unless there's a genuine health emergency. Any disputes must be reported in accordance with the competition rules. You have to comply with time requirements, and it's going to be considered in scoring individual performances. Team J, would you like to introduce your folks?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead and do that. I realize this is my first time doing a Zoom for this mock trial, so I don't know what everybody else is doing, but just go ahead and do it.
Okay. I am Nathan Prentice. I will be attorney 1. I will be directing Dakota and crossing Skylar and doing the opening statement.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Edmond Kunith. I will be conducting the direct examination of Carson Durst and the cross-examination of Blake Doncourt.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. I'm Nicholas Sanulis. I'll be directing Casey Rogers and crossing Dr. Devin Williams.
Thank you.
I'm Kale Afficker, and I will be portraying Dakota Weirs.
Thank you.
My name is John Kegel, and I'm going to be Carson Durst today.
My name is Alex Kaiser, and I'll be portraying Casey Rogers.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Attorney Team T, would you do introductions, please?
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the jury and opposing counsel. My name is Zach Billings, and I will be delivering the opening statements, direct examining Dr. Devin Williams, and cross-examining Carson Durst.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the jury and opposing counsel. My name is Emma Nakotra, and I will be conducting the direct examination of Skylar Weirs and the cross-examination of Dr. Casey Rogers.
Okay.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the jury and opposing counsel. My name is Caroline Dieter, and I will be conducting the direct examination of Blake Doncourt, the cross-examination of Dakota Weirs, as well as delivering closing arguments. At this time, may our witnesses introduce themselves?
Yes, please. You're muted.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the jury and opposing counsel. My name is Aiden Phelps, and I am Blake Doncourt.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the jury and opposing counsel. My name is Sebastian Solis, and I am Skylar Weirs.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the jury and opposing counsel. My name is Oliver Howe, and I am Dr. Devin Williams.
Excellent. Thank you all. I'm going to trust everyone on their honor. We're going to administer the oath. So team members, if you would please raise your right hands and repeat after. I'm going to give you the oath, and I want to hear you say I do. Team members, please raise your hands. Do you promise that the presentation you are about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to the facts and the rules of the mock trial competition?
I do.
All right. Witnesses, do you promise that the testimony you're about to give will faithfully and truthfully conform to your witness statements, that you will not add material facts or opinions which are not contained in the case problem, and that you will follow the rules and procedures of the mock trial competition?
I do.
If there's any coaches, gallery members, you should raise your right hands. Do you promise to represent yourselves as positive role models and to behave in a manner that exemplifies the ethical and professional sportsmanship during and after this mock trial round? They did. Scoring panelists, please raise your right hands. Do you promise to adjudicate the mock trial competition as fairly and objectively as possible in accordance with the facts, procedures, and rules of the mock trial competition? I do. All right. Excellent. Thank you. All right. If we're ready to go, and are there any other preliminary matters?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please.
Your Honor, I would like to present a copy of the stipulated facts, both of which the plaintiff and the defense have agreed on.
Okay. Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Please do.
Furthermore, we would like to reserve any time left in the closing statement for the plaintiff to be used for rebuttal.
Granted.
And lastly, we would like timing to temporarily stop during the event of objections as well as technological errors due to the circumstances that we're presently in.
My understanding is that's the provision of the rules, so granted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Thank you. Anything from Team T at the outset?
Yes, Your Honor. Just one more thing. We ask that the exhibits only be screen shared after they've been admitted into evidence.
I think that's the way it should go. There needs to be a foundation laid and the exhibits need to be received before there's a screen share.
Thank you, Your Honor. We have nothing further.
Excellent. That being the case, I think we're ready to start. So if the plaintiff is prepared to proceed, do you have an opening statement?
Yes, sir.
All right. Please proceed.
Okay.
And I should have told everyone, I'm sorry, Mr. Prentice. I have no qualms. If you wish to stand, anyone who's doing work on this video wishes to stand, that's fine. If you wish to remain seated because of camera issues, microphones, that's fine too. We're going to not observe the formality of requiring everyone to stand, but you can if you want to. So anyway, I'm sorry, Mr. Prentice, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, our client, Dakota Weirs, was robbed of the only passion left in his life, the piano, which was taught to him by his late grandfather, a passion that granted him a full ride scholarship to Juilliard, a passion that led him to be an avid member of the community. We are asking you, the jury, to find that Lush Fertilizer was negligent and award Dakota Weirs emotional damages in the presentation of the facts and evidence of this case. We will prove a preponderance of evidence with that Lush Fertilizer contains a carcinogenic chemical known as DURFO. These facts and evidence will be provided by 3 witnesses: Dakota Weirs, our client, Carson Durst, a former employee of Lush Fertilizer, and our expert witness, Dr. Casey Rogers. To address Lush Fertilizer, the defendant was negligent by failing to exercise reasonable care to prevent the product from creating a risk of harm to people who use the product. Our client, Dakota, was one of the people the defendant should have expected to use the product in a reasonable manner. As such, due to the fact that our client was using the product in a way that best suited the environment, he did not, in fact, use the product in a fashion that would, under normal circumstances, lead to cancer. First, you will hear from our client, Dakota Weirs. Dakota was an avid member of the community. This, however, would not last. Due to repeated exposure to Lush Fertilizer, the product that contains DURFO, at her job, Havens Landscaping, we will prove that this was the cause of her cancer. Dakota, now lost in life with a bright future, whether going to Juilliard on a full ride scholarship, volunteering with the community, or to play the piano and keep their grandfather's memory alive. Next, you will hear from Carson Durst. Carson Durst worked for Lush Fertilizer in the research and development of the product. Carson was close with the CEO of Lush Fertilizer, Blake Doncourt. Carson was treated terribly by him and the company and is now seeing it fit to bring out the facts of the case, the facts that our Lush Fertilizer did not take proper precautions for the safety of the people, and how they could have done more to save the product. Finally, you will hear from our expert witness, Dr. Casey Rogers, who has done a study on serious medical conditions resulting from prolonged exposure to DURFO. Dr. Rogers is a credible expert in the field of agriculture, entomology, and toxicology. Dr. Rogers is also quite experienced when Durfo came to the market.
Your Honor, it appears our
Severe
co-counsel
health
is currently
conditions
experiencing technical difficulties.
that are
Yes, he's frozen on the screen. So let's stop the time.
Please give us just a moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
When did it cut off?
You said he was highly experienced.
Okay.
That's the last thing I heard.
Highly experienced in the effects of prolonged exposure to chemicals such as Durfo. He started doing research when Durfo came to the market and began his study into the effects of Durfo shortly after its release. You will hear that the study revealed severe health conditions that are a consequence of prolonged exposure to the chemical agent Durfo. Through a combination of testimonies, it will be revealed how Lush was negligent in their handling of Durfo, as they did not only fail to make it safe for the consumer, they failed to warn them of the dangers of their product. The only way to hold Lush fertilizer responsible is to find them negligent. As Lush manufactured Durfo, Lush failed to exercise reasonable care. Dakota used the product, and Dakota's damages were caused by Lush's negligence, and therefore Dakota should be awarded emotional damages. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Is there an opening statement for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
The first answer isn't the right answer. Who hasn't walked up to the wrong car? Who hasn't had a cough or symptom and turned to WebMD and saw the 20 things they were afflicted with, only to realize it wasn't any of them? Perhaps you saw an ad on TV and thought you finally found an answer, only to realize it was wrong. And that is what this case is about. When Dakota Weirs saw a story on TV and his first answer was wrong. At the end of this case, you will have to decide whether the plaintiff proved their case by a preponderance of the evidence. That is, whether something is more likely than not. The plaintiff has the burden of proof. They will be required to prove both that Lush was negligent and that this negligence caused Dakota Weirs' cancer and damages. If, and only if, you find both these things proven, you will have to decide if we proved by a preponderance of the evidence that Dakota Weirs' own negligence contributed to the situation. It might seem there are two separate cases being tried in front of you, but the comments about Lush and Blake Doncourt are simply not accurate to who they are. Let me introduce you to Blake. Blake has been the CEO of Lush since 2000 and is committed to donating 10% of his annual profits to charities. He was personally nominated for the United Nations Champions of the Earth Award in 2020. Both he and the EPA did testing on Drufo before putting it on the market, and none of these tests showed Drufo to be carcinogenic. You also hear from another man who has done more research than about anyone else, Skylar Weirs, Dakota's own brother. Skylar is the only person here who will testify against their own interests. In fact, Skylar's life would be better if Dakota were to win. But what will he tell you? He will tell you that Drufo bonds to the grass and the fertilizer to prevent from being washed away as quickly when the water comes through. This reduces the amount of applications and hence the amount of exposure to the chemicals. It also reduces the amount of nitrogen runoff in the earth. Dr. Devin Williams will tell you about the damages of this nitrogen runoff. One of these is eutrophication, which is the buildup of excess nitrates in bodies of water. Dr. Williams will tell you how Drufo does not cause cancer. He will also tell you about the issues with Dr. Rogers' study. And yes, although Dr. Rogers will attempt to refute these claims about his one study, you will learn that the study was never replicated, published, or even peer-reviewed. In fact, it wasn't even Drufo specific. It took large groups of people who worked a lot with fertilizers, those who worked little with fertilizers, and those who never worked with fertilizers. And yes, although it showed a link of fertilizer to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, it never showed a link of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma to Drufo. Now, you will also hear from another man, Carson Durst, a former employee of Lush, who wasn't at all the meetings, didn't have all the information, and left Lush only after being put on a performance improvement plan to be fired. Carson Durst's bias is clear. Carson was fired by Lush and is now working for their biggest competitor, Terrace Greenery. Now, let me be clear. Nobody here is happy about Dakota's diagnosis, but this case is about liability and responsibility. And unfortunately, some of that responsibility falls on Dakota himself. Dakota chose not to follow proper safety precautions. Dakota didn't wear pants. Dakota didn't wear long sleeves. And Dakota didn't even wear a proper safety mask when working with fertilizers. Dakota then saw a story on TV about Lush and Drufo possibly causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and chose to go after the first answer. Dakota didn't even look into other fertilizers he worked with. At the end of this case, we will ask you to return a judgment for the defense, because this time, the first answer was wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Billings. Does the plaintiff wish to call their first witness?
Yes, sir. I'd like to call Dakota Weirs to the stand.
Please proceed.
Dakota, can you state your name and spell it for the record?
My name is Dakota Weirs, Weirs.
Mr. Weirs, why are you here today?
I'm here because I recently contracted non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from working with Lush Fertilizers products.
Who is Lush Fertilizer?
Lush Fertilizer is a fertilizer company that I used while working at Havens Landscaping.
When were you employed at Havens Landscaping?
I started working at Havens Landscaping when I was 14 years old.
And when did you start developing symptoms?
I started developing symptoms a couple years after working at Havens.
While working at Havens Landscaping, did you primarily work with Lush Fertilizer, a product that contains Durfo?
Yes.
How did you use this product?
I would use it as an aerosol while working it into the ground.
And while you worked with this product, were you encouraged to take any precautions while using it?
Yes, we're encouraged to wear a mask, gloves, and wear clothing to cover our skin.
Did you consistently wear the mask or gloves?
No, the conditions were too extreme to wear the masks and gloves and long sleeves.
Did any of your other fellow employees wear the masks, long sleeves, or any of the such? So, when prior to being diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, what did you typically enjoy doing outside of work?
One of my main hobbies was playing the piano.
How did you get into playing the piano?
I started playing the piano when my grandfather passed away. His death sparked my passion.
And how has your disease affected you?
Could you repeat the question?
How has your disease affected you?
I'm no longer to play the piano because of the fatigue that I've gotten.
Besides not being able to play the piano, what other ways have you been affected?
I've lost my full ride scholarship to Juilliard.
Has this affected your ability to do any community service?
Yes, I can no longer do any community service that I performed before.
And other than Juilliard, How has this affected your ability to perform in school?
I can no longer perform well in school because of how tired I get, and I can't sit for long periods of time.
Dakota, are you aware of your twin sister's involvement in the defense of this case?
Yes, I am.
Are you and Skylar particularly close?
No, we aren't particularly close, but when we were younger, we did all the same activities other than my working at Haven's Landscaping.
Okay. Do you know what Skylar does?
Skylar is a writer for the Rationalist newspaper.
And what are your opinions of your brother's writing?
Skylar.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Mr. Prentice?
Okay. The question is relevant as it pertains to Skylar's involvement in the case and Dakota's general response as it is necessary in determining any and all emotional damages.
May I respond?
Please.
Your Honor, I fail to see, while I do agree that it's important to establish the relationship between the two siblings, I fail to see how Dakota's opinions on Skylar's writing are at all pertinent to the outcome of this case.
Ms. Dieter, I think the relationship is tenuous, but I'm going to allow the question and the answer. So, Mr. Prentice, please continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I will ask the question again. Dakota, what are your opinions on your brother's writing?
Skylar's a talented writer, but they normally write for money, and they've written many questionable articles on certain scientific things.
Thank you, Dakota. No further questions.
Cross-examination, Ms. Dieter,
Yes, Your Honor.
please proceed.
Good evening, Mr. Weirs. My name is Caroline Dieter, and I'm going to be asking you some questions today. If you could keep your answers to a simple yes or no, that would be ideal. Let's begin. You're currently 20 years old, right?
Correct.
Sorry?
Yes.
And it was fairly recently that you received your non-Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosis, wasn't it?
Correct.
And you have a general understanding of how your illness develops, isn't that right?
Yes.
So then you know that it is environmental, not genetic, right?
Yes.
And for this illness to develop, it usually stems from some sort of exposure to chemicals. Am I right?
Yes.
I'd like to discuss the circumstances of your exposure. At age 14, you worked for Haven Landscaping, right?
Correct.
And your main responsibility there was spreading seeds and fertilizer.
Yes.
And this is where you first encountered Lush's product, right?
Yes.
But that was far from the only product you used in your day-to-day work, right?
Correct.
In fact, it was just one among the many other fertilizers and lawn chemicals that you used daily. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And these products all had some sort of instruction that users were supposed to adhere to for their safety, didn't they?
I assume so, yes.
You were aware of these precautions?
No.
You were not aware of these precautions?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay. So while at Haven, you worked under a boss, didn't you?
Yes.
And he too said that you were to always follow these safety recommendations, didn't he?
Yes.
But you chose to ignore both him and the label's instruction, didn't you?
Yes.
In fact, you chose to not wear gloves when working with fertilizer.
Yes.
You chose not to wear the required long sleeve shirt for your job, did you?
Correct.
You chose not to wear the required pants for your job.
Correct.
In fact, you chose not even to bother consistently wearing a proper mask while working with these aerosol chemicals. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Weirs. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the labeling on the products that you used. You have Exhibit 1 in front of you, do you? On paper?
I do not have it in front of me.
Your Honor, how should I go about entering an exhibit? Should I just put it on the screen?
Sorry. If Mr. Weirs doesn't have the exhibit in front of him, let's go ahead and screen share and show it to us. And but we still need to go through the process of getting it admitted.
Yes. I asked that time could be paused while we work out the technology.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Weirs, do you see this?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
What is it?
It's the packaging for the Lush fertilizer.
And is this an accurate representation of the packaging as you knew it?
Yes.
Your Honor, the defense moves to enter Exhibit 1 into evidence as its accuracy and authenticity have been shown.
Mr. Prentice? Mr. Prentice, do you have any objection?
Yes, I object to the relevance of this exhibit to the current case.
Ms. Dieter, what's the relevance?
Well, considering the fact that we are discussing Lush's role, possible role in the plaintiff's injury, as well as negligence, I feel that knowing the safety recommendations given on this label, as Dakota Weirs would have access to, is very relevant to today's case.
Objection overruled. Exhibit 1 will be received. Please proceed.
Mr. Weirs, would you please read silently under user safety recommendations as I read aloud?
Do what? Sorry.
Would you please follow along silently under user safety recommendations as I read aloud? As with any spray fertilizer, utilize protective clothing that covers exposed skin. Use of a respirator or N95 face mask is recommended. I read that correctly, didn't I?
Yes.
And isn't it true that there is not a single one of those listed instructions that you consistently followed?
Correct.
Your Honor, may co-counsel remove the exhibit? Mr. Weirs, let's talk a little bit more about labeling. You say that Lush didn't have a warning, but rather a recommendation?
Correct.
But other products that you worked with had actual warnings, didn't they?
Yes.
So you viewed those as more dangerous then?
Yes.
So even with that, though, viewing them as more dangerous, you chose not to follow their instructions either, did you?
I did not.
And not only that, despite viewing them as more dangerous, as you have said, you didn't even bother to look into any of them as potential causes of your illness, did you?
No.
So isn't it true that you landed on the first answer provided and said good enough?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Weirs. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect, Mr. Prentice?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
Dakota, can you tell the jury exactly why you were unable to wear the long sleeves and pants as instructed by the packaging?
Yes. We were unable to wear the long sleeves and the mask and gloves because of how hot the weather got in the summer. Yeah. it got too hot for us to consistently wear all the safety equipment that they recommended.
Okay. And to your knowledge, Dakota, did any of the other products that you used contain a relatively untested element known as DURFO?
No, they didn't.
Objection, Your Honor. Out of the scope of the cross.
Mr. Prentice? The objection is beyond the scope of cross. Any response?
My response.
Sustained.
Dakota would. Okay.
I'm sorry. Do you have a response?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Dakota would know what the chemical composition, or at least the packaging of the other.
Mr. Prentice, you're
It is
frozen.
within the scope of the cross.
Say it again. Say it
Oh,
again.
okay. Essentially, it is within the scope of the cross due to the fact that Dakota should as well know that the other fertilizers that were used did not contain this chemical agent.
Ms. Dieter, anything further?
Yes, Your Honor, I didn't bring up the chemical compositions of any of the other products in my cross. So I would still argue that it is not within the scope.
I'm going to allow it, but thank you for the objection. Go ahead, Mr. Prentice.
That is all I have for the redirect.
Ms. Dieter, do you have any recross within the scope of redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
You talk about saying that you knew that other products didn't have Drufo in them, right?
Yes.
But isn't it true that you didn't actually investigate any of them? So you wouldn't actually have any idea what's inside of their ingredient lists?
Yeah, I would have been able to see the packaging when I was using them, though.
But you didn't investigate them, did you?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Mr. Weirs can be released. Mr. Prentice, do you have any further witnesses to call?
No, I do not have any further witnesses to call.
Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to call Mr. Carson Durst to the stand.
All right. Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Durst, please state your name, spelling the last for the record.
Carson Durst, D-U-R-S-T.
And what is your current occupation?
I work at Terry's Greenery.
And what do you do there?
I'm the head of research and development, and I work on a whole host of their lawn enhancement products.
Have your previous occupations been similar?
Yes.
Where was this previous occupation at?
I worked at Lush for their research and development team.
And did you have any contacts or acquaintances at Lush Fertilizer?
Blake and Charles Doncourt.
And how do you know of Charles Doncourt?
We were friends as kids, and we went to Arizona State University together.
And how would you describe your relationship with Charles Doncourt?
At the time, we were best friends, I would say.
Now, moving on, did you graduate from Arizona State University?
Yes, with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering.
All right. And going back to your former employer, what was your specific position at Lush Fertilizer?
I worked on the research and development team as a product development engineer, and 3 months into the job, I was promoted to that after 3 months.
And why were you promoted?
I was performing at a higher level than the people around me, and after a certain point of time, Blake just saw that I was fit for the promotion, and he gave it to me.
During your time at Lush Fertilizer, what major work did you take part in?
The biggest one was the development of Drufo.
And what's the purpose of Drufo?
It's a bonding agent that helps preserve the product.
Were there any studies done in relation to Drufo?
There was an English study done on the possibility of its carcinogenic effect in rats.
And what did the English study show?
That it is a possible carcinogen in rats.
And what did you do with this information?
I put the information in my lab notebook.
Now moving on, what actions did Lush Fertilizer take after learning of this news?
Jerry Langley, who was the product manager, should have taken all of my reports from my notebook and compiled them into one big document that goes to upper management.
And what actions did the company take after this?
They did an in-house study on humans exploring the carcinogenic effect.
And what happened after that study?
We were discussing some of the study in our analysis, and one scientist who expressed his concern of Drufo in relation to non-Hodgkin lymphoma.
What did the study report conclude?
That it was within the federal standards, but from my participation, the study itself was misleading.
And what impact would the management of Lush Fertilizer have on these reports?
They can have their writers fit into whatever narrative they would like to make it look better or worse or however they please. They can also refer to cases such as Dakota's as outliers.
And what actions could have been taken to prevent the adverse effects of Drufo?
They could have baked the product, which I actually recommended.
Did they actually bake the product?
No, they never baked it.
Now, after this study, did the relationship between you and your coworkers at Lush Fertilizer change?
Yes, it did. Because of my concerns for Drufo, there was a sudden pushback from people on my team. And because of this, I wasn't performing quite as well as I was.
And how did you respond to this?
I talked to Blake about everything, and they refused to do anything and told me how they overlooked other candidates.
Your Honor, relevance.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yeah, please do.
In terms of the relation of Carson Durst and his former employer, it's significant to helping inform the story of how he worked with Drufo as well as his experience at Lush Fertilizer.
Mr. Billings?
I fail how to see how his relationship with his employers is any relevance to the case of Lush possibly causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in Dakota Weirs.
Your Honor, may I respond briefly?
Very briefly.
In terms of what the foundation laid earlier between the effects of Durst studying Drufo and releasing these reports and the relationship of his coworkers helps influence the status of Lush Fertilizer of what they did with Drufo to the product.
Mr. Billings, you get the last word.
Your Honor, as his relationship does not display if Drufo was not carcinogenic, it does not meet the elements of this case.
All right, I'm going to allow the testimony. Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. And now going on, how did you feel about how Blake responded to you?
At the time, Blake had been going through a rough divorce, so they might have just been taking out some of their stress on me. However, I wasn't quite expecting my boss and close friend to respond like that. And at that point, I realized I didn't really have much of a future at Lush, so I moved on.
Now, what happened after your conversation with Blake?
I reached out to Tara's and started talking to them.
And what happened to your position at Lush Fertilizer?
I was fired, but then I was fired by Lush, but they refused to let me work at Terrace, citing a non-disclosure agreement I had signed. And after a while, there was a settlement reached that I could start working there after 6 months.
And now, based upon your experience at Lush Fertilizer, did they know about the carcinogenic effects of Drufo?
I have no doubt that they did know, and instead of acting on it and actually baking the product like they should have, they just decided to hide it, and it's dangerous enough to cause non-Hodgkin lymphoma.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Kunith. Any cross-examination, Mr. Billings?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Durst. My name is Mr. Billings, and I will be asking you a few questions. If you could please keep your answers to a yes or no, that would be ideal.
Absolutely.
Now, you knew Charlie Doncourt, correct?
Yes, I did.
And Charlie's dad is Blake Doncourt?
Yes.
And Blake Doncourt is the CEO of Lush Fertilizer.
Yes.
Now, that's the company that you had formerly worked at.
Yes, I did work there.
And after 3 months working with Lush, you were promoted to product development engineer.
Yes, I was promoted to the product development engineer.
And as product development engineer, you worked with their product Drufo, correct?
Yes, I did. I helped develop it.
And in this development, you also looked at studies on Drufo, correct?
Yes, I did.
And one of these studies was a study from England. Is that true?
Yes, it was an English study.
And this study showed that Drufo may cause carcinogenic effects in humans and rats, correct?
Yes, it was a possible carcinogen.
Thank you. Now, you were at a meeting with Lush Fertilizer, correct, regarding the safeties of Drufo?
Yes, I was.
And you were told to keep it in the walls, correct?
Yeah.
But you weren't at all the other meetings regarding Drufo, correct?
No, it was not.
Objection relevance.
Response?
Your Honor, this is relevant as to how Carson worked with Drufo, and Drufo is the alleged cause of Dakota Weir's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it is regarding the safety of Drufo.
Mr. Kenneth?
Your Honor, the relation of any other meetings that Carson had with Lush Fertilizer is not discussed within this case, and it should solely be based upon the meeting presented currently.
Are you suggesting it's not in the case problem, or are you saying it's not relevant?
I'm suggesting that the other meetings aren't relevant to this case.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Please go ahead and answer the question.
I'm sorry, can you please ask the question again?
Yes, now, you weren't at all the other meetings regarding the safety of Drufo, correct?
No, it was not.
Thank you. Now, when you were, after a few while working with Lush, you started to receive criticism from your coworkers, correct?
Yes, I did receive criticism.
And you eventually received performance reviews that reflected those sentiments.
Yes, that is also correct.
Now, these performance reviews cause you to have to go on a performance improvement plan, correct?
Yes.
And this performance improvement plan meant that you were marginalized at work?
Yes.
In fact, you felt that you were actually relegated the assignments that nobody wanted due to this.
Yeah.
Now, you brought this up with the CEO, Blake Doncourt, correct?
Yes, I did.
And Blake told you that you were lucky to even have a job.
Objection hearsay.
Mr. Billings?
Your Honor, this is not offered for the truth of the matter, but for the effect on the listener.
Mr. Kenneth?
Your Honor, in terms of the relation between the conversation between Blake Doncourt and Carson Durst, specifically about the performance, does not relate at all to the effects of Drufo and the effects that Dakota Wears had.
I'm going to allow the question. Please proceed.
Would you like me to ask the question again?
Yes, sir.
Now, Blake told you that you were lucky to even have a job. Isn't that true?
Yes, that is what he said.
And he told you that he had overlooked qualified applicants to hire you?
I was told he overlooked other applicants.
Yes, and these applicants, he said, were qualified.
I would assume so, yeah.
Now, he also said that he overlooked applicants that were like from Ivy League schools, correct?
Yes.
Now, in 2005, you received another abysmal performance review, correct?
Yes.
And you went to go talk to Blake again about this.
Yes, I did.
And Blake told you to just work out whatever problems you were having on your own, correct?
Yeah, I was told to work out with Jerry Langley.
Yes, and Jerry Langley is your boss, was your boss.
Yeah.
Now, you left Blake's office disheartened, correct?
Yes, I did.
In fact, you were seething.
I wouldn't say seething.
Objection relevance.
Your
Mr.
Honor,
Billings?
Your Honor, I'm laying foundation for further questions.
Well, subject to being linked up, I'll allow it. Go ahead.
Now, you were seething, correct?
I wouldn't say so.
Is it your testimony here today that you were not seething?
No, I mean, I guess I was angry, but
But is it your testimony here today that you were not seething?
no, I guess I was seething.
Thank you. Now, you felt confused after this talk with Blake, correct?
Yes.
In fact, you also felt betrayed by somebody who had called you family. Isn't that true?
Yes, that would be correct.
And you thought that you had no future with the company, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you went to start searching for another job. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's when I started looking at Terrace.
Yes, and you found this job at Terrace Greenery, which is Lush's biggest competitor.
Yes, that is correct.
And you thought that working for Terrace Greenery would get Blake's goat, correct?
Sorry. Yes.
Now, you were already hired by Terrace Greenery when Lush found out and fired you. Isn't that true?
Yes, that is also correct.
And when they fired you, a legal battle ensued?
Yeah, about the agreement I had signed.
Yes, you did sign a confidentiality agreement that stated you would not work for or share company secrets with a competitor company of Lush, correct?
Yes.
Now, you work for Lush Terrace Greenery now, and when you started working there, you worked on a new product of theirs, correct?
Yes, that is also correct.
And this product is projected to beat Lush's product in the market, correct?
Yeah.
And you plan to overtake Lush in the market of fertilizer, correct?
Objection relevance, Your Honor.
Mr. Billings, what's the relevance?
Your Honor, I'm laying bias for this case.
Your Honor, may I
Mr.
respond?
Cuniff? Yeah.
In terms of which the competitive ship between different corporations still doesn't affect the experience that Carson Durst had at Lush Fertilizer, nor does it contribute to his findings in regards to Drupa.
Mr. Billings?
Your Honor, I'm laying foundation for Carson Durst's bias in this case.
I'm going to allow it. Go ahead.
Now, Mr. Durst, you say that Terrace Greenery is projected to overtake Lush in the fertilizer industry, correct?
Yes, that is the goal.
And it's reasonable to assume that in order to overtake a company, two things must happen. Either one, Terrace Greenery sells more, or Lush miraculously sells less, correct?
I guess, yeah.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Durst, previously, when you first started with the company, how were your reviews? Or performance reviews specifically?
They were good.
And when did they start becoming negative?
Right around the time that I started voicing my concerns about this product.
Mm-hmm. And now moving on, out of all the applicants that was reviewed for your position, Blake Doncourt still chose you, correct?
Yes.
And this includes ones who possibly have more experience than you or higher education.
Yeah, absolutely.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any recross within the scope of redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, this witness will be excused. And if the plaintiff has any other witnesses, let's call them.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Dr. Casey Rogers to the stand. Hello, Mr. Rogers. Please state your name and spell your last for the record.
Hello there, my name is Casey Rogers, Rogers.
And why are you here today?
I'm here because I wish to provide my expert opinion for the plaintiff's side and provide an explanation of the evidence.
And so where are you currently employed?
I'm currently employed as a professor of horticulture and entomology at the University of California, Berkeley.
And where have you received your education?
I earned my Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and Chemistry from Colorado State University, and I also received a PhD in Agriculture and Entomology from the University of California, Berkeley.
Your Honor, I would like to now introduce Exhibit 6. Let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel that which has been marked as Exhibit 6.
The record will so reflect.
If co-counsel can screen share, please.
One moment, please, Your Honor.
Yeah. Thank you, co-counsel. What is in front of you?
In front of me is a copy of my current CV, which sets forth my educational and professional work background and experience.
Is this a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, it is.
Has this been altered in any way?
No.
Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit 6 into evidence.
Your Honor,
Ms. Nakota?
yes. Your Honor, we object to Exhibit 6 being entered into evidence as it is hearsay.
Looks like hearsay to me, Mr. Stanlis.
It was made by the Dr. Casey Rogers himself, so he made it himself. He is here and present in the court at this time. So,
Ms. Nakota?
Your Honor, this is still an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
Sustained.
Okay. Your Honor, can I please introduce Exhibit 7? Your Honor, let the record reflect that I'm now showing Exhibit 7 to opposing counsel. What is in front of you?
That is a list of published works that I have published for the scientific community.
Is this a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, that is.
Has it been altered in any way?
No, it is not.
Can you explain what your published work is?
My published work includes a number of scholarly articles on the negative and harmful effects of prolonged exposure to various chemicals, of which includes Truffaut.
Your Honor, I would like to enter Exhibit 7 into evidence.
Your Honor, at this time, I would also like to object to Exhibit 7 being entered as it is also hearsay.
Mr. Stanlis?
Your Honor, he created this document himself, and it provides evidence to the fact that he is qualified to be an expert witness and understands Truffaut's long-term effects, and it provides evidence to his character.
Well, I think, Ms. Nakota?
Your Honor, just because this provides evidence to who Dr. Rogers is does not mean that it's not hearsay.
Yes. And so unfortunately, Mr. Stanlis, this is in fact hearsay. What I suggest, if I may, is that just have the good doctor talk about what he's published, have the good doctor talk about what his qualifications are, and then we won't have a hearsay problem. But I'm not going to allow something he's written up to come in because it is hearsay. So sustained.
Okay. Dr. Rogers, you have published a number of works. What do these works include? What are they about?
They're about the dangerous effects of prolonged use of various chemicals, such as Truffaut, to name one of a few, and their negative effects on the human body, including how they can cause such things as cancer.
Your Honor, at this time, we request for Dr. Casey Rogers to be qualified as an expert witness in agriculture and entomology, as they have a PhD in that area, as well as an expert in the negative and harmful effects of prolonged exposure to various chemicals, including Truffaut.
Any objection?
Your Honor, I have no objection to Dr. Rogers being entered in the field of agriculture, although I don't see how entomology relates to his testimony in today's case.
All right. The doctor will be accepted as an expert in the fields of agriculture and entomology and be allowed to testify and render opinions as such. Please proceed.
When did you first get knowledge of Truffaut?
Truffaut first caught my attention when it first came onto the market.
And when Truffaut came to your attention, did you do any research?
Yes, I did. I believe that it's rushed to the market without sufficient studies on its safety. So I decided to conduct a study on my own to see if there's any adverse health effects on any human being who's exposed to Jufo for long periods of time.
So is Drufo an ingredient?
Yes, it is.
And what does Drufo do?
Jufo can be best described as a bonding agent that Lush uses in their fertilizers. And Jufo specifically is used to preserve the fertilizer and keep it intact.
And so when was Drufo developed?
Jufo was first developed in 2003.
And who developed Drufo?
It was developed by the research and development team at Lush Fertilizer.
And so does every Lush fertilizer product include Drufo?
Yes, it does.
And so how do you know that?
I've analyzed the chemical makeup of each Lush fertilizer product using a mass spectrometer.
Moving on, what was your research focused on?
My research was focused on the long-term health effects of prolonged exposure of Jufo on human beings.
Was this the first time you had knowledge of Drufo being harmful?
Unfortunately, no. It has already been known that Jufo was carcinogenic in rats.
So can you explain the premise of your study?
So the premise of my study was that I took a control group of people who had never been exposed to Jufo, and then another group of people who used products containing Jufo on occasion. And lastly, there's a group of people who are exposed to Jufo on a regular, almost daily basis.
And so how long did the study last?
The study lasted for a few years, and the groups who had been exposed to Jufo were monitored for various health effects and various health conditions. And they were compared to the control groups, which were people not exposed to Jufo.
And so what were the findings of the study?
The study found an increase in cancer, including non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, as well as other diseases in individuals who were exposed to Jufo, as compared to the control group. The group that had occasional exposure to Jufo were 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with cancer, and the group that had prolonged exposure to Jufo were 10 times more likely to be diagnosed with cancer.
Was there a correlation between Drufo and cancer?
Yes, there was.
And so what would a correlation between Drufo and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma look like?
The majority of those diagnosed with cancer were diagnosed with cancers involving endocrine 51 and exocrine 4. The first answer, okay. My apologies. You see, the majority of the cases that were diagnosed with what's called endocrine 51 and exocrine varieties of cancer, the latter of which includes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Just some questions about non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma genetic?
Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is not genetic.
So then how is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma contracted?
Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is caused
Objection, Your Honor.
There's an objection. 2 questions back. Go ahead.
2 questions back.
Yes.
Sorry.
She stood up. I could see her.
Your Honor, we object to this witness testimony on non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as it is out of the scope of his expertise.
Mr. Stanlis?
I believe he was qualified as an expert in prolonged health effects, and this falls under prolonged health effects. So I believe that.
Ms. Nicotra?
My apologies, Your Honor. I thought he was just qualified as an expert in agriculture and entomology.
Mr. Stanlis, did you offer him in long-term health effects? And did I miss that?
I think you missed it, sir. I thought it was clear. She only objected to the entomology.
I heard the objection to the etymology. If you also offered him in long-term health effects and there wasn't an objection, I'll allow him to testify to it.
I did offer that.
Okay, please proceed. Objections overruled. Thank you.
Would you like me to ask the question again?
Yes, please do.
Then how is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma contracted?
Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is contracted via various environmental conditions, including exposure to substances such as pesticides.
So in your expert opinion, Dr. Rogers, is there a correlation between non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and Drufo?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Ms. Nicotra?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
Hello, Mr. Rogers. My name is Emma Nicotra, and I will be asking you some questions today. If you could please keep your answer to a short yes or no, that would be preferable.
All right, I'll try to.
Now, Dr. Rogers, Drufo first caught your eye when it came out on the market, correct?
This is correct.
From there, you conducted a study on it in 2013, yes?
I did conduct a study on it.
Yet, over this decade or so's worth of research, this is your first time testifying as an expert witness on this subject. Isn't that right?
Yes, it is.
Now, Dr. Rogers, after this case, you hope to testify on Drufo again, correct?
Yes, Drufo is a dangerous chemical, and I hope to bring to light its various issues.
You hope that this case will open the door for future class action lawsuits, correct?
Yes, as Drufo is dangerous.
And you want to be on the front line of this battle, isn't that right?
Yes, I did create a study that showed that Drufo is dangerous after all.
Maybe even launch a new career sideline off of this?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Ms. Nicotra?
Your Honor, this is not speculation. As the witness testified, he would like to testify in future cases on Drufo, and expert witnesses can be paid for their testimony. So I'm not speculating.
Mr. Stanless, anything else?
It is outside of the scope of his witness statement, I believe.
Well, I can't address that issue. I'm going to allow the question as proper cross-examination, and then if there's an issue with it being unfair extrapolation, somebody will bring that up.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Rogers, on the subject of career sidelines, you worked as a research analyst, correct?
Yes, I did.
And as a research analyst, you worked at a large multinational company, correct?
Yes, I did.
And this company was in the chemical industry, isn't that right?
Yes, they were.
And Lush Fertilizer is in the chemical industry, isn't that right?
I suppose so.
And to clarify, you cannot disclose what company you worked for, isn't that right?
That's outside of my witness testimony.
In fact, it is not. In your statement, you do say that you cannot disclose which company this is.
I just don't specify the name of it, but I still worked at a large chemical company.
Can you specify the name of this company?
No, I cannot. It is not in my witness statement.
I see. Now, let's move on to your study. You conducted a study on Drufo, correct?
Yes, I did.
And this study had 3 groups of people, yes?
It did.
The first group being a control group of people who were not exposed to Drufo, correct?
That is precisely correct.
The next group, people occasionally exposed to Drufo, yes?
That is precisely correct.
And the final group, groups of people who were regularly exposed to Drufo, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, among the people exposed to Drufo were casual farmers and gardeners, correct?
That is correct.
Now, your study found higher instances of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in these gardeners and farmers, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And isn't it true that non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is caused by environmental conditions, Dr. Rogers?
I did testify that.
Environmental conditions, including pesticides, correct?
Yes, pesticides and fertilizers.
Now, these groups of people, these gardeners and farmers, were exposed to other pesticides. Isn't that right?
That is not in my statement.
Would you please still answer the question?
I'm not about to lie about it.
Objection, Your Honor. It's assuming facts, non-evidence.
Ms. Nicotra?
Your Honor, this is a reasonable extrapolation. As he conducted this study, he would have personal knowledge to whether or not the groups of people were exposed to other fertilizers.
Your Honor, can I offer a brief response?
Yes.
We were specifically asked not to inject our own opinions. I feel that this is someone's own opinion and is unclear as to what the answer should be.
Well, so Mr. Kotra, the risk that you run, as I understand it, is if you ask on cross-examination a question of the witness for information that's not in their statement, then he can make up whatever he wants and say it because you're the one that invited the error. It can't be done on direct, but on cross-examination, if you break it, you buy it. So I would be cautious about asking questions about answers are not in his statement, because he could say any daggone thing he wants, and I don't think we can do anything about it. But I'm going to overrule the objection, and you can decide whether you want to ask the question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Rogers, you didn't include in your statement what other fertilizers these groups of people were exposed to. Isn't that right?
That's correct. The focus of the study was on Truffaut.
You didn't include how often these groups of people were exposed to these other fertilizers. Isn't that right?
That is outside of my testimony.
Exactly. You didn't include it in your testimony, correct?
That is outside of my witness statement.
You did not include how often these people were exposed to other fertilizers in your testimony, correct?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the point of my study was on the dangerous effects of Truffaut, not the dangerous effects of other fertilizers and pesticides.
Yes, but Dr. Rogers, in your study, it would be important to know what other fertilizers or pesticides these groups of people were exposed to in order to get accurate results. And you didn't include this information in your testimony. Isn't that right?
Well, as I mentioned before, the study of the focus.
Objection, Your Honor. This is assuming assuming facts, not evidence. We don't know that the farm laborers were exposed to different fertilizers at all. We haven't established that.
Ms. Nkotra?
Your Honor, I'm admitting that this is out of his testimony. I'm simply bringing light to the fact that he didn't include this in his testimony.
But the objection is there isn't a foundation that there in fact was other exposure. Is there any evidence that you're aware of other exposures?
The fact that he didn't include it in his testimony hints to the fact that there were other exposures.
I'm going to sustain the objection. Move on.
Now, Dr. Rogers, after conducting your study, you were any recommendations to people about how they could limit their exposure to Truffaut, correct?
Yes, I did, judging as Truffaut dangerous.
These recommendations included wearing long sleeves, correct?
Yes, Truffaut dangerous after all.
And Lush already recommends that people using their products wear long sleeves. Isn't that right?
That's a simple recommendation, not a requirement.
You recommend that people wear long pants when working with Truffaut, correct?
Yes, as it is dangerous.
And Lush Fertilizer already has these recommendations.
Objection.
Isn't that right?
Objection, Your Honor. I don't see these recommendations. Referring to Exhibit 1, the recommendations are only that they need to use N95 masks.
Well, the witness can take care of that issue. So I'll allow the question.
Would you like me to re-ask the question?
Yes, please do.
Lush Fertilizer already recommends that people wear long pants when working with their products, correct?
Give me a second.
You're on. Dr. Rogers, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next question.
All right.
Lastly, you recommend that people wear masks when working with Truffaut, correct?
Yes, as Truffaut is dangerous.
And Lush Fertilizer already recommends this. Isn't that right?
That's the recommendation on the back of the packaging. But it is only a recommendation after all that they provide.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. No further questions.
Mr. Stanlis, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Never mind, Your Honor. None of it would be outside the scope of the cross.
All right. If there's no redirect, then there won't be any recross. And does the plaintiff have any other witnesses, Mr. Stanlis?
No, Your Honor.
Does the plaintiff rest?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you very much. Does the defense wish to call any witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor, we do. The defense calls Blake Downcourt to the stand.
Please proceed.
Good evening, Mr. Downcourt. My name is Caroline Dieter, and I will be asking you some questions today. Would you please state your name and spell your last for the record?
My name is Blake Downcourt, Doncourt.
Thank you, Mr. Downcourt. Let's begin. Your Honor, really quickly, could I get my name changed?
Yes.
Let's begin. What is your connection to today's case?
I'm the CEO of Lush Fertilizer.
And can you tell us a little bit about your history with Lush?
I've been with the company since 2000, and since then I've really been happy with what I've been able to do, for not only for my employees, but for my consumers and for the planet.
You say "and for the planet." Are there any values Lush holds regarding the planet?
Oh, certainly. We donate 10% of our profits to charities that help reduce the nitrogen footprint on our Earth.
Objection relevance, Your Honor. I don't see how Lush's contributions to the world at all relate to Drufo and its relation to this case.
Ms. Dieter?
Your Honor, this is providing foundation as to the way the company operates, especially regarding their values and how that might contribute to what business practices Mr. Downcourt would take regarding safety.
Your Honor, may I respond briefly?
Briefly.
In regards to Lush Fertilizer in terms of its actions environmentally, it's simply too circumstantial worth of any evidence to provide foundation to gain closer towards Blake Downcourt in relation to Drufo in this case.
Well, I'm going to allow the testimony. It's general background, and clearly he can testify to what's occurred. So it's not really, anyway, yeah, I'm going to allow it. So please go ahead, Ms. Dieter.
Would you like me to ask that again? Mr. Downcourt?
Oh, yes. Yes, please.
Are there any values? Oh, excuse me, sorry. You were in the middle of answering, but I'll ask again. Are there any values that Lush holds at the heart of your operations?
Yeah, so as I was saying, we donate 10% of our profits to charities that help reduce the nitrogen footprint on the Earth. We also help climate education. We lobby for that. And we have our own charities that have other miscellaneous environmental causes.
Mr. Downcourt, have you ever been officially commended for these efforts?
Yes, in 2020, I was nominated for the UN Champions of the Earth Award, but unfortunately, all of this happens. I was hoping to get nominated for it in 2021. We'll win it in 2021, but this happens.
Mr. Downcourt, I mean, these are great accomplishments. I have to ask, what went wrong? Why are you on trial here today?
Well, we've been falsely accused of knowingly putting out a product that was carcinogenic, and I'm here to just explain that that's not true.
And where is this supposed carcinogen found?
The plaintiff is alleging that it's found in Drufo.
And are these claims about Drufo true?
No, they're not.
How do you know?
Well, we conduct our mini safety tests ourselves. I mean, we really care about safety here at Lush. And it's not just that. There's a lot of regulations for a product to go on the market. The fertilizer is regulated by the EPA, so it wasn't even just us that found it to be safe.
So the Environmental Protection Agency found it to be safe? And Mr. Downcourt, based on both of these findings, did you see it fit to put a warning label on your product?
Yes, as with any spray fertilizer, you typically want to wear an N95 mask to not breathe it in. Humans are only supposed to breathe in air. It's just common sense within the industry.
And Mr. Downcourt, keeping with the topic of safety, did you are you aware of any benefits that would come from baking a product such as yours?
Well, for a product that is carcinogenic.
Objection,
traditionally-
speculation.
Response, Ms. Dieter.
Your Honor, I fail to see how this is speculation when he is CEO of his company and has plenty of knowledge regarding the practices of baking and their impact on the product itself.
Your Honor, may I provide an explanation to my objection?
I wish you would.
In terms of Mr. Doncourt knowing whether Truffaut needs to be baked or not, he may be the CEO of the company. However, he does not have, there is no foundation in terms of how he is aware of the effects of baking on Truffaut, nor of specifically how he obtained this information of the effects of baking on Truffaut.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Briefly.
Counsel, that was foundation. I didn't ask what it was. I asked if he was aware of any benefits that could come from baking a product such as his. That was the foundation.
So Ms. Dieter, I think that the foundation issue is appropriate. So lay some foundation for how he knows, and then we can get to what it is he knows. Okay?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Doncourt, there are many different safety practices that Lush has to go through, correct?
Yes, we run numerous tests in our labs to see if a product is safe. And if a product is found to be carcinogenic, what is typically done in our industry is to bake it.
So, did you ever investigate the finances that would come with baking?
Certainly, as with any potential expense, we're going to see the finances behind it. And I made an amortization table in 2004 to look at all that.
Your Honor, I'm constructively showing opposing counsel an unmarked copy of Exhibit 8. Mr. Phelps, you have Exhibit 8 in front of you, correct?
Yes, I do.
Could you please flip it over and look at it? Do you recognize this exhibit?
I do.
And what is it?
This is the amortization table that I made in 2004.
Is it a regular part of your job to create tables forecasting Lush's profits like this one?
Yes.
And is this an accurate representation of the table as you knew it?
Yes.
Your Honor, the defense moves to enter Exhibit 8 into evidence as its accuracy and authenticity have been shown.
Mr. Knuth?
I have no rejections in regards to that. However, the plaintiff was unable to see the actual clean and unmarked copy of this exhibit.
Ms. Dieter, did you give a copy to Mr. Knuth?
That's why I said constructively. I believe it was within my preliminary matters that if a copy was available, it wouldn't be put on the screen. And I assumed that the attorneys would have a copy available.
Mr. Knuth, have you seen this amortization table?
As Mr. Doncourt is presently showing me, yes, now I have.
It's part of the problem though, right? You have it in the exhibits from the problem?
Yes, that's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. So do you have any objection to it?
No, I do not.
Okay. Then this exhibit we received, what's the number?
8.
8. All right, 8's received.
May my co-counsel please publish?
Yes.
Mr. Doncourt, when did you make this chart?
In 2004.
And was that before Lush had ran their safety studies?
Yes.
Can you please explain this chart to myself and the jury?
Well, we were prepared to bake Drupal. We found that it was carcinogenic. So as we do, and as a CEO, I had to see how that would affect us financially.
And according to this chart, would Lush still be profitable had it been necessary for you to bake?
Certainly, and the estimated net profit change, it varies between 7 to 2% from a 7 to 2% difference, which is really not that large. We're still making millions of dollars.
So this was before your safety studies. Why did you make this chart?
As I said, it's just general practice in business to just see how any potential expense would affect your profits.
So were you fully prepared to bake if it was necessary?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Doncourt. You can set that aside. Co-counsel, could you remove the exhibit, please? Thank you. Mr. Doncourt, I'd like to move on and talk a little bit about Carson Durst. Do you know Carson Durst?
I do. He was a close friend of my son, and yeah, he's like family to me. And he was also previously an employee at Lush, and now he's testifying against us today.
Are you aware of Carson Durst's claims?
Yes.
And being that you were above and he was employed underneath you, would you say that being in that position, Carson Durst would have sufficient knowledge to make these kinds of claims against your company?
Certainly not. He was in research and development. He wasn't in our safety and toxicology departments. So no, he would really never have any knowledge of any of those workings at all.
I see. Now, once more, I'd like to move on and talk about Dakota Weirs. Could you please tell us a little bit about your feelings regarding his situation?
I feel horrible for Dakota. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is a terrible disease, and I really hope the best for him. I hope he's able to go to Juilliard and play the piano there, but I just have to make clear today that we did not cause his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Finally, Mr. Doncourt, would you ever knowingly put out a product that was carcinogenic?
No, that's unethical. I mean, it goes against who I am and what our company stands for. And that also just be bad business. We'd be facing lawsuits like this every single day.
I see. Thank you, Mr. Doncourt. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Cross-examination, Mr. Kenneth.
Thank you, Your Honor. First, I would like to start off with, you do claim that the chemicals in Drufo are not linked to cancer. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm saying that there's no, okay, well, it really depends like what you consider a link. There are minute risks of anything you could say are to cancer, if that makes sense.
Indeed, there are.
But we're
Yet
saying
with
that's
all
not
this,
statistically significant.
of course. Yet with all this information you presented me, you have no scientific background that you have presented today to prove that. Is that correct?
Well, I don't have my resume in within the case, but to become CEO of like the nation's largest fertilizer company, you have to know a lot about the industry and the science. So no, I would say I do have knowledge.
Well, of course, with the industry, of course, yet you don't know the specific backgrounds in terms to whether the link causes cancer, but rather circumstantial. Is that correct?
I suppose so. I mean, I don't know like all the inner workings within like each department of my company, but I do have like a pretty good understanding.
All right. Now, moving on, with Carson moving to a different corporation after your relationship between him as well as you during his time at Lush Fertilizer, you mentioned him as a regrettable disappointment, correct?
Yes.
You state.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes, I did say that. He went to work for a competitor of ours. We believe that he's using company secrets to create a product that is a new product that's going on the market from Terry's Greenery that is very similar to our own. So I really do feel that way, and it saddens me. I gave him his first job, and he was like a son to me.
Mm-hmm. And you state that Carson moved companies for higher earnings.
Yes, as I said within that witness statement, we really do not see how he would be able to get that title. He did not do so well at Lush. We unfortunately had to let him go.
Okay, in terms of that, and of course, with him, you supposedly claimed that you shared secrets, moved for a higher salary, yet there's no credible evidence available to prove that claim. Is that correct?
I mean, I don't have any specific exhibits to prove that, but I mean, given all the circumstances that we've heard in this trial, and my own testament here today, I think I've made it pretty clear.
So the testimony that Carson shared secrets with Tara's Greenery and he moved for higher earnings is specifically your opinion, correct?
I mean, it's the rational perception to me. Yeah, it is my opinion. It's of others.
All right, and so going on, you stated that the fertilizer is not baked, is that correct?
Yes, it was a necessary expense. We found no statistically significant linkage to cancer, and neither did the EPA. So there was no need to bake it.
Yet, so despite even still being able to make profits off of it, and of course for an extra layer of safety, you still chose not to bake that fertilizer. Is that correct?
Correct. It was necessary.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ms. Dieter, do you have any redirect within the scope of cross?
A brief one, Your Honor. Mr. Doncourt, you were close with Carson Durst, right?
Certainly.
And so you have been able to see firsthand the successes that Carson Durst has had within Tara's Greenery.
Yes, I have.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any recross within that very limited redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, the witness will be excused. Does the defense have any other witnesses they wish to call?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Skylar Weirs to the stand. Also, before we begin, could I have a brief time check, please?
Yes, you have 16 minutes and 34 seconds left.
Perfect. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Emma Kotra, and I will be asking some questions today. Could you please introduce yourself to the court, Mr. Weirs?
Yes, my name is Skylar Weirs. That's Weirs.
Weirs, are you in any way related to Dakota Weirs in this case?
Yes, he's my fraternal twin.
Mr. Weirs, why are you here today?
I'm here because of my job.
What's your job?
I'm an investigative journalist for the Rationalist magazine.
What is the Rationalist magazine?
We are a scientific journal that promotes science, education, and facts.
What topics do you cover at the Rationalist?
We usually cover topics that are highly politicized in the media and that gather around a lot of misinformation.
What topics do you specifically cover?
I have been covering agri-tech or agricultural technology.
What is agricultural technology?
Well, that can include anything from fertilizers, high-tech greenhouses, things of the sort.
Has this led you to research anything specifically?
Yes, it's led me to write an article about Drufo, an American product of Lush fertilizer.
And how long have you been conducting this research?
I've been conducting this research for around a year.
Mr. Weirs, how did you go about this research?
I read and researched extensively on multiple publications and studies created by dozens of agri-tech companies and even studies made by the USDA and NASDA.
Did you do anything specific when reading these articles?
Yes, so under every article made by these companies, they have footnotes of their original sources. And not only did I read those articles, I went into their original sources and researched those.
Your Honor, at this time, we move to enter Skylar Weirs as an expert witness in the field of modern agri-tech.
Mr. Prentice.
I object based on the fact that no matter how much reading that Skylar can do based on this topic, they cannot be admitted as an expert as they do not have a degree in this field.
Mr. Kotra.
Your Honor, in order to be entered as an expert witness under 702, one does not need to hold a specific degree. Mr. Weirs has sufficient knowledge through his self-education on the subject of modern agri-tech.
I think it's a close call, but I'm going to allow him to testify in the field of modern agri-tech. So please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Beers, you mentioned you researched fertilizers. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What do they do?
Well, I can tell you about what ingredients do what, the specifics of fertilizers, but I'll put it simply, fertilizers help plants grow.
And how do they do this?
They do this with the help of several common chemicals: arsenic, glyphosates, nitrates.
Are any of these chemicals dangerous?
Yes, arsenic is a known carcinogen, and nitrates have a number of problems.
Besides having negative effects on humans, how do these ingredients impact the environment?
Well, nitrates, when in excess, can run off into bodies of water and create dead zones, which are bad for the environment.
Relevance. Objection relevance.
You're muted,
Muted.
Your Honor.
Yeah. What's the relevance, Ms. Nicotra?
Your Honor, this is relevant as he's testifying about fertilizers and pesticides, and Drufo is one of those. I'm using it to compare to other pesticides, and the relevance will be seen on my future questions.
Mr. Prentice? You're frozen. Try it again. Try it again. Do you have anything else, Mr. Prentice?
No.
All right. I'm going to allow the testimony. Please proceed.
Now, Mr. Beers, do these fertilizers, ingredients in these fertilizers, have any negative effects on the environment?
Yes, nitrates in excess can run off and create dead zones in bodies of water, which are bad for the environment.
Now, are any companies working to change the status quo in the fertilizer industry?
Yes, slush fertilizer.
And how are they doing this?
By not putting in any arsenic or glyphosates and working to take nitrates out of the soil by putting less in.
Is there any specific way that they're going about this?
Yes. So in most common fertilizers, they need to be applied 5 or 6 times a year. And with lush fertilizer and the help of Drufo, they only need to be applied once or twice a year.
What products are helping them do this?
Oh, yes, Drufo, the American product, and lush fertilizer.
What is Drufo?
Drufo is a bonding agent, it's a fertilizer, and it's a pesticide all at once.
Is this a relatively new product?
Yes, it's truly revolutionary.
Because of the revolutionary nature of this product, are there any concerns surrounding it?
Yes, with all new advancements in technology, there will always be misconceptions and misinformation surrounding them. For example, with microwaves, when they first came out, people were afraid to use them because they thought it caused cancer.
What are some of these concerns?
Some of these concerns are that Drufo causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
And is there any evidence to support this?
No, absolutely not.
Now, Mr. Beers, circling back, let's talk a little bit about your personal life. Is it hard to support yourself as a young journalist?
Well, yes. I'm not making much money as a journalist, but my career is taking off. But I have had to acquire a part-time job to sustain myself.
And have you had any past financial struggles because of this?
Admittedly, I was a bit of a sports gambler.
Has anyone helped you out with your struggles?
My mother, as well as Dakota's mother, helped me out financially when she was still alive, but sadly she passed. And after that, my father cut me off.
Are you in any way financially connected to your family today?
As far as I know, my father hasn't cut me out of the will yet.
How would the outcome of this case affect you financially?
Well, my father is shouldering the cost for this lawsuit and also paying for my brother's medical bills. So if my brother were to win this case, my father would have more money to bequeath to me if something terrible were to happen to him.
Now, Mr. Beers, did you come to an expert opinion in this case?
Yes, I did.
What is that opinion?
Drufo did not cause my brother's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It's much more likely that one of, or if not a combination of different chemicals that he was exposed to at Haven Landscaping caused this illness.
Is there anything that you would like to say to your brother, Mr. Weirs?
Yes. Dakota, I love you very much. And
Objection relevance.
Ms.
Response, Your Honor?
Decotra? Yes.
This is relevant as he is Dakota's sibling, and it relates to his testimony on the effects of Drufo on his brother's illness.
Objection sustained. Next question.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Decotra. Is there cross-examination, Mr. Prentice?
Thank you, Your Honor. Skylar, you weren't an employee at Lush Fertilizer, correct?
no, I was not an employee at Lush Fertilizer.
And you are not an agricultural scientist.
No, I'm an investigative reporter, as I said.
And you're currently employed at the Rationalist.
Yes, I am.
And for your job, you write conspiracy articles for them, correct?
No, I do not. I write scientific articles supporting science education and attempting to clear up any misinformation surrounding these scientific topics.
So, as you said, you never got a college degree, did you?
Not yet, no.
When you were at the Rationalist, you wrote articles about Lush Fertilizer and Drufo, right?
I wrote an article about Drufo, yes.
And of how Drufo is safer, correct?
Yes.
Yet, it's still a carcinogen.
No. It also doesn't have arsenic, which is, again, a known carcinogen found in many fertilizers, and it doesn't have any glyphosates.
Okay. Do you typically put the same amount of research into all articles?
Yes, I'm very focused on all of my articles, and I work hard to research and write as many facts as I can to put into my articles.
Yeah. Would that time be decreased any by your part-time servitude at Applebee's?
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation.
Mr. Prentice? You're frozen, Mr. Prentice. Try again.
Sorry.
Yeah. What's your response?
My response to the lack of foundation
Yes.
here is that quite simply, it is established based off of the previous question about the articles and the work and time put in to said articles, that the part-time work at Applebee's is called upon.
I'm going to allow the question. Go ahead. And
All right, could you
Thank you,
repeat the
Your Honor.
question?
Yes. Would you say working as a part-time server at Applebee's decreases the amount of time you can spend researching your articles?
No, I wouldn't say that. I still work very hard and put in a lot of time in researching my articles. This is simply something to pay the bills.
And for your work at Applebee's, you need to work there to make enough money to sustain yourself, correct?
It's a part-time job, yes.
Okay. Yet, you in fact have a great deal of gambling debt, right?
I have, sadly, but I've quit sports gambling, and it was a terrible mistake.
I can't hear you, Mr.
Your
Prentice.
Honor, it appears our co-counsel is suffering technical difficulties. If we can have time paused until it fixes itself.
Yes.
Thank you.
Time has been paused.
Okay, it looks like you're back, Mr. Prentice. Why don't you try that again?
Yes, sorry. So wouldn't you say it was irresponsible to accrue such gambling debt while in a tight financial situation as a reporter?
Well, yes, as I said, it was a terrible mistake, and well, I would never do it again. I'm trying to sustain myself and pay those off.
Yeah, okay. You and Dakota are siblings, right?
Yes, we are.
And the only difference between the two of you is that Dakota worked for Havens, right?
Yes, that's where he's exposed to tons of different chemicals and, well, yes.
And Dakota got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but you didn't.
Yes, that's correct.
And you would agree and know that Dakota used dangerous products that are known to be carcinogenic while working at Havens Landscaping?
Yes, but these products were not Truffaut.
Yes, and Dakota worked specifically with Lush Fertilizer a great deal at Havens Landscaping, right?
He did work with Lush fertilizers, yes. But I know he also worked with tons of other chemicals, tons of other fertilizers.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Ms. Nicotra, do you have any redirect within the scope of that cross?
Yes, Your Honor, a brief redirect. Mr. Rears, how does the fact that you didn't attend college affect your ability to research modern agritech?
It's given me more time to focus, work on my passion as an investigative reporter, and really focus and put in time into my research.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
I assume there's no further recross within the scope of that redirect?
No,
All right.
none at all.
All right, thank you. And so, Mr. Rears, you can be released, and if the defense has any other witnesses, please call them.
Yeah.
Yes, Your Honor, the defense calls to the stand Dr. Devin Williams. Good evening, Dr. Williams. May you please state your name and spell your last for the record?
Mr. Billings, if I may have a moment to get my, thank you. All right. Yes. My name is Dr. Devin Williams. That's spelled Williams.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Williams, what is your educational background?
Well, I received my Bachelor's of Science at Colorado State University in toxicology, my Master's of Science in forensic toxicology, also at CSU, and my PhD in pharmacology and toxicology, again at CSU. In addition, through my education through my PhD, I completed a post-PhD program at the University of Utah in pharmacotoxicology.
Now, Dr. Williams, what is your current employment status?
Currently, my main source of employment is as the lead in research and development of toxicology at Lush Fertilizer. Also at Lush, I'm the current outgoing ethics committee chair. In addition to my work at Lush, I am an assistant tenured professor at the University of New Mexico and a visiting professor at Colorado State University.
Now, Dr. Williams, do you have any previous work experience?
Yes, I previously worked at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Larimer County.
Now, what did you do there?
There, I analyzed samples of autopsies to determine if toxic chemicals played a role in deaths and in the deaths of those people who were sampled, and if it did cause their deaths, to what extent.
Now, Dr. Williams, you mentioned you were the lead toxicology researcher. What does that mean?
Well, I'll start with one part of your question, what it means to be a research toxicologist. What that really means is I look at biological systems and I look at potentially toxic chemicals, and I see if those toxic chemicals are toxic to that biological system, for example, alcohol in humans or many other toxic chemicals in other biological systems. And just what it means to be the lead toxicologist at Lush, that just means I am in charge of the labs there.
Thank you. Now, how long have you worked with Lush?
I've worked at Lush for about 12 years.
And with your work at Lush, have you worked with their product Truffaut?
For pretty much my entire employment, so yes.
Thank you. Now, do you hold any specific certifications in toxicology?
Yes, I actually hold several certifications in various states. That's Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this time, the defense tenders Dr. Williams as an expert in the fields of toxicology and DRUFO.
Mr. Stanlis,
Your Honor, I request to void dire.
please do.
Dr. Williams, have you testified in court as an expert witness in toxicology before?
This is not my statement. Would you like me to answer?
Yes, please.
I've actually testified 5 previous times in various cases against Lush before. All of those were actually found as in the favor of the defense.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You don't work directly with the development of products anymore?
My job title is lead of research and development in toxicology at Lush. So I do work with the development of DRUFO and other Lush products.
But do you work directly or are you supervising?
I work directly in the labs. I supervise. I like to get my hands dirty.
Your Honor, no further questions.
And what's your position on the offer of this witness as an expert in the field of toxicology and on DRUFO?
Your Honor, no objection.
There being no objection, Dr. Williams will be accepted in the fields of toxicology and regarding the product DRUFO and may be allowed to offer opinions as such. Mr. Billings, please continue.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Williams, what exactly is DRUFO?
DRUFO is a bonding agent that is put in some of Lush's products.
No, what's a bonding agent?
Well, to put it simply, a bonding agent just keeps 2 things together. In the case of DRUFO, that's the fertilizer in the plant.
Now, why is it important to keep the fertilizer and the plant together?
Well, obviously, fertilizer is put in an environment with lots of factors that can contribute. One of those is water runoff. And if water comes through the plant that the fertilizer was just applied in, and that fertilizer does not have a bonding agent, that fertilizer has a free ride to a body of water going right off the plant.
Now, why is it a bad thing? Or is it a bad thing that if it runs off?
Oh, yes, that can have severe environmental impacts.
Now, what is some of these environmental impacts you speak of?
Well, when that fertilizer goes with the water to bodies of water, that fertilizer will end up in the bodies of water, and that can actually cause eutrophication.
What is eutrophication, though?
Eutrophication is the buildup of excessive nitrates in bodies of water. In Greek, eutrophication literally translates to grows too good. But how can that be bad? Fertilizer is meant to make things grow too good. Well, in the case of eutrophication, that is the algae in the water. And that is very, very bad environmental impacts.
How is the growth of algae in water bad for the environment?
Well, like a weed in a yard, the weed takes all the water. In a body of water, that algae is taking all of that oxygen. So fish, other plants, they're not going to be able to survive because they have no oxygen.
Now, does DRUFO cause eutrophication?
No, DRUFO actually stops eutrophication at the source.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Williams, has Lush ever faced any international difficulties?
Yes, Lush was actually banned in the European Union due to their new nitrate directive.
What is that new nitrate directive?
The new nitrate directive was something that they put in place that said no new fertilizers could contribute to more than incidental rates of nitrates.
And does DRUFO do this?
From what the EU saw, it does. But what the EU did to see this is they put DRUFO in a petri dish, added just the right bacteria, and it was shown that DRUFO had released just the same amount of nitrates as a regular fertilizer would. But that's actually not the case in the real environment.
Now, what do you mean by it's not the case in the real environment? How does the real environment work then?
Well, in the real environment, DRUFO is bonding to that plant. So when water comes through, none of that is getting into the environment because it is bonded to the plant.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Williams, did you perform a study in the alleged link of DRUFO to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma?
Yes, my lab actually looked at data in that case.
And what did this study find?
That study found that there was no statistically significant increase in cases of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in users of DRUFO and other fertilizers.
What do you mean by statistically significant?
Well, in a large group of people, I mean any large group of people that could be users of DRUFO. That could be people who drink Coca-Cola. That could be people who live in Colorado. There is going to be some people in those groups that develop non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. That's just a fact for any large group. And because of that, we don't know what caused a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and we have to use statistics to figure out if that is what caused non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And that's what I mean by statistically significant.
Now, are there any results of this study that can be skewed by anything?
Yes, as I said, if that random random increase that has nothing to do with the study actually is taken into account, and you don't use statistical formulas, you don't use statistical analysis on it, your results will be skewed.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Williams, are you familiar with any other studies on Drufo's alleged link of Drufo to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma?
Yes, I'm familiar with Dr. Casey Rogers' study.
Now, do you take any particular issue with this study?
Well, to start, his study was not peer reviewed. His study it's not even being replicated. And again, his study was fundamentally flawed.
What do you mean by fundamentally flawed?
His study looked at 3 groups of people, the first of which don't use fertilizer at all. The second of which use fertilizer and Drufo somewhat often. The third of which uses Drufo and other fertilizers on a daily basis. And you can't do that. That's not a fair comparison to Drufo and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
But why is it not a fair comparison?
Because you're not isolating Drufo. You're just saying somewhere in agriculture, something causes cancer, because his study did not isolate users of Drufo with other fertilizers. It just showed people who work with fertilizer often, people who work with fertilizer somewhat often, and people who don't work with fertilizer. And that you can't compare Drufo with that, because that's not isolating Drufo. And if we all took a basic science class, we know you can really only have one dependent variable.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Williams, do you have an expert opinion in this case?
I do, yes.
And what is that opinion?
Mr. Reeves' cancer was not caused by Drufo.
Now, how do you know this?
I know this because there have been, well, I'll just start with this. We don't know the exact chemicals, and we don't have an entire list of the exact chemicals that Mr. Reeves was using. And even if we did, I personally don't have the expertise in those chemicals to tell you if they would or not cause cancer, but I do have the expertise in Drufo. And I can tell you very confidently that Drufo does not cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
And how can you tell me this?
There have been no studies or surveys that have shown Drufo causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma directly.
But what about Dr. Rogers' study?
Again, his study showed in the large array of environmental factors that people in agriculture work with, something causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. His study did not show that Drufo causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And as I said in my study, we isolated Drufo, and we showed that Drufo does not have a statistically significant increase of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Billings. Do you have any cross-examination, Mr. Stanless?
I do. Dr. Williams, you started at Lush 12 years ago, correct?
Yes.
And when you started at Lush, your job was to fill in for the many technicians that were leaving had worked on Drufo.
Well, yes, at the time, many of the other people who worked on Drufo were moving on to other ventures outside the company. So I had to fill in. Yes. So that actually got me a lot of experience with Drufo.
So the technicians that just to clarify, the technicians that were working on Drufo left the company.
Yes, as I said, yes, they.
I just wanted to clarify.
Outside the company. Okay,
so
yes.
Could this loss of technicians you hoped to replace cause issues with the Drufo testing?
Well, obviously less people means you can't do it at a higher speed, but we did not take shortcuts in our testing. It just caused a lengthier timeline. It did not cause worse tests.
Switching back to Drufo, you mentioned Drufo is banned by the European Union, correct?
Yes, I did.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Drufo is also banned in other countries such as Haiti and Liberia that aren't inside the European Union.
Yes, that's just because those countries don't have the infrastructure to do their own studies on things like Drufo and other things that like maybe the EPA would look at, other things that the European Union Environmental Protection Agency counterpart would look at. So they just follow what the European Union does.
So when the EU banned your product, was it possible that Lush could have fought this?
At the time, I would say it wasn't possible. Lush was such a small company that they did not have the resources to fight it. Now, actually, my lab is finishing up a study that will challenge the European Union ban. And if the results are what we hypothesize they will be, the European Union will be shown the environmental benefits of Drufo and it will be unbanned.
So in your direct, you mentioned you know Casey Rogers and are familiar with his study, correct?
I did, yes.
Did you review Dr. Rogers' study before coming today?
Of course, if I'm familiar with it, I would have reviewed it.
Do you believe that Rogers is trying to become a niche expert witness?
He is a niche expert witness. I mean, his entire career is based on Drufo and its correlation, if you want to call it that, because there's no actual correlation to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Okay, moving on. You work for the defense, correct?
Do you mean Lush Fertilizer?
I do mean Lush Fertilizer.
Yes, I do work for Lush Fertilizer.
And so Lush Fertilizer is paying you, correct?
Well, if I work there, I'd hope to be paid.
I would assume so.
Yes.
So you have a financial claim in this case, correct?
I do, yes. Well, I'm being paid by the company, my salary, so yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Stanless. Is there any follow-up redirect, Mr. Billings, within the scope of cross?
No, Your Honor.
All right, there being no cross-examination, this witness can be excused. Does the defense have any further witnesses to call?
No, Your Honor, the defense.
No, Your Honor,
Apologize.
defense rests.
Okay, the defense having rested, and there's no further witnesses. Is there a closing statement for the plaintiffs?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, and you're going to give it, Mr. Knuth?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you have witnessed today is only the tip of the iceberg. Few can begin to understand the horrors of being young with a deadly and costly disease. And you have just seen the damage it can do to a person. The truth that Lush Fertilizer placed Drufo in their products is unmistakable. The company knowingly placed a carcinogen in their product, a product that causes cancer. Lush knew, and they ignored it. Dakota Wares was seen to have suffered immensely. Wares cannot even do favorite activities. Wares' life has been derailed. Carson Durst showed us an inside look into Lush Fertilizer and the dangerous harm that Lush placed in people's way. The first-hand accounts show a horde that not only Dakota had, but many others could have been the victim of Drufo. Dr. Casey Rogers talked about how dangerous Drufo can be. Through studies that Rogers has testified about, along with Carson Durst, Drufo has been proven as a carcinogen. Even the European banned Drufo for multiple reasons, including just an abundance of caution. Unfortunately, in the United States, there is no regulation like Europe has. And because of that, Dakota has fallen into the trap of Drufo. What you heard from the defendant, Lush Fertilizer, was simply a cover-up. Skylar Wares, the twin sibling of Dakota, chose a company over her own family. Skylar even placed down information with the looming bias of Dakota in the background. Whether Dakota would deny this bias or not, it's still there. You also heard from the owner of Lush Fertilizer, Blake Doncourt, who also has bias against his company, as any owner does, to protect his company at all costs. He goes as far as to call the plaintiff unscrupulous people in his witness statement in order to get his company out of hot water. For a highly regarded person, it's certainly an immature way to defend your company. Even Dr. Devin Williams utilized excuses where Drufo isn't a carcinogen. Yet despite all the studies conducted, he still can't definitely say that Drufo does not cause cancer. These motions by the defendant under an immature manner can only be deemed as hard to believe. Today, you heard proof by a preponderance of the evidence, or in other words, that is more likely than not that Lush Fertilizer made Drufo and was negligent by failing to exercise reasonable care to prevent an unreasonable risk of harm. The plaintiff was one of those persons the defendant should have reasonably expected to use those products. Now it's up to you to find whether Lush Fertilizer committed this. No one should ever have to worry about cancer. And unfortunately, Dakota has fallen into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knath. I assume you'll reserve the balance of your time.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Is there a closing statement for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. The first answer isn't always the right one. When Dakota Weirs was diagnosed with his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, he quickly found himself in a world of hurt and confusion. Looking for something to turn to, he found answers in the form of the first story he saw on TV, which happened to be about Lush fertilizer. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as you have heard here today, the first answer was wrong. The plaintiff's stance that Drufo causes cancer could not be further from the truth. Their main support comes from one study run by Dr. Casey Rogers, a study that has not been replicated, not been published, and not been peer-reviewed. Their expert failed to specify in his study whether or not the participants used multiple products, just like Dakota. What the plaintiff had to do here was show that Drufo causes cancer. But as Dr. Williams highlighted, what they've actually done is shown that other products may cause cancer. What we do know is what's right in front of us. We know that throughout the entirety of his career with Lush, Blake Doncourt made safety the #1 priority. You heard Skylar Weirs explain that Lush's product was actually safer because it required fewer applications than other fertilizers. Blake Doncourt, every single decision he made was based on the findings of their safety studies, even the decision not to bake. Lush followed the science. When you heard comments from Carson Durst here today claiming the opposite, I'd like to remind you that Carson Durst currently works for Lush's leading competitor. But even before that, while at Lush, he didn't have all the information. He wasn't at all the meetings. What he does have is a strong personal and professional bias against Lush. It's undeniable that what Dakota's going through is a tragedy that should not be taken lightly. However, that isn't the question of today's trial. This is a case about causation and negligence. The plaintiff has the burden of proof here today, which means they had to prove 4 separate things to you, not just one, all 4. Now, we as the defense don't dispute claims 1 and 3. So to narrow it down, let's look at where they failed, starting with claim 2. The plaintiff argues that Lush failed to prevent an unreasonable risk of harm for reasonable users of their product. We know that isn't true because there was no unreasonable risk of harm. Lush ran extensive studies. The Environmental Protection Agency ran extensive studies. And guess what they found? That's right. They both found nothing, certainly not cancer. The second thing that the plaintiff has to prove is that while being used in a reasonable manner, Lush's product was the cause of the plaintiff's injuries. Now we know neither part of that is true. We know from the scientific studies that Drufo doesn't cause cancer. And we know from Dakota Weirs himself that he didn't use the product reasonably, that he routinely disregarded every safety instruction. If you feel that the plaintiff failed to prove even one of these facts, then your judgment must be for the defense. We do not believe that Lush caused the plaintiff's injuries, but to hear, well, granted, the plaintiff did not put a numerical value on damages, but to hear them, if they had asked for a number on damages, you would have to reduce that number for the plaintiff's own negligence. You heard Dakota Weirs talk about how he didn't wear the required long sleeve shirt, how he didn't wear pants, how he didn't wear gloves, how he didn't wear a proper face mask when working with these chemicals. Dakota Weirs threw caution to the wind. Mr. Weirs' condition is devastating. But of all the people in court here today, only one person hurt Dakota, and that was Dakota himself. And that is precisely why we ask you, members of the jury, to deliver a judgment for the defense, because the first answer, it was wrong. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Mr. Knath, do you have, how much time do you have left?
He has 2 minutes and 3 seconds left.
All right, Mr. Knath.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, once again, you have just heard a cover-up. They claim that Dakota first saw this on a TV and all of a sudden decided that was the cause. Dakota worked with Drufo constantly and worked with Lush fertilizer products constantly. Through his experience working with these products all the time, there is no doubt that Drufo might have been the most likely cause. Many things cause cancer, whether it may be radiation or processed foods. There are many. However, Drufo is the one that Dakota most worked with. Going further, Durst, despite moving on to a different company, did great work in order to put himself at Lush Fertilizer. And when he voiced his concerns about an in-house study, all of a sudden his reviews became bad, negative, and he was tossed out and fired from the company. He didn't switch companies. He got fired and then switched. Within the in-house studies, when there's doubt or question about it, how can we trust any studies outside where they weren't specifically looking for any carcinogens? Quite simply, the defense is once again covering up the situation in just one short statement. Once again, I asked to you by a preponderance of the evidence to show that Lush Fertilizer was negligent upon these claims. And on top of that, Dakota Wares needs support in order for this to recover from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And once again, with the devastating effect of cancer,
I'm sorry,
Lush Fertilizer is done.
Thank you, Mr. Knath. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
All
Your
right.
Honor.
The case will stand submitted. The scoring panelists are going to take some time and enter their scores. Ms. Boucher, I'll look to you to let us know when we ought to go ahead and provide any feedback. So let's go ahead and do the scoring. Hopefully the team members can hear me. I want to just take a minute while the other scoring panelists are submitting their ballots. And just I want to thank everyone for the very excellent presentation we've had today. I want to especially thank the coaches and the parents who've worked so hard. And if we were all in the room together, I'd ask that we give them a round of applause. But since we're not, what I'm going to do is ask the team members to please be sure this evening and let the folks who have supported you know how much you appreciate them. But I do want to compliment all of the teammates, all the team members, the witnesses, the lawyers, obviously you all have prepared very well, very thoroughly, and it was very well done. I also want to suggest to you that, this is a circumstance where you all know this problem very well. And what I discovered was as you went along, you got more comfortable, particularly when you were a little bit off script. So I want to encourage you, trust your preparation. You know what's going on here. You've done a great job. You've done the work. Hopefully this is fun and you can relax and just kind of go with it. I want to congratulate everyone on a very fine round. Unfortunately, one team wins, one team loses, but everyone did a great job and we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. So, Ms. Boucher, Mr. Laranaga, whenever you're ready, if you have any verbal feedback